A billionaire CEO, furious after being forced to take a crowded bus for the first time in his life, sits down, only to lock eyes with a boy who unknowingly reveals the truth. "Dad, it's me." Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Ethan Fairchild was the kind of man who believed he had conquered every corner of life. In the public eye, he was the billionaire CEO who graced the covers of business magazines and economic journals. His corporate headquarters dominated the skyline in Midtown, and his personal estate sprawled across acres of prime real estate in the heart of Manhattan. He traveled in private jets, arrived at black-tie events in sleek town cars, and kept his circle of confidants limited to the people who helped build his empire. Yet for all his wealth and status, Ethan had never once stepped foot on a public bus. On an unremarkable Tuesday morning, fate decided to test his usual routine. His private driver, a dependable man named Smith, had fallen ill with a severe bout of pneumonia. Normally, one of the backup chauffeurs would have taken his place, but a series of scheduling catastrophes left Ethan without a single available driver. At first, the thought of hailing a taxi or ordering a rideshare crossed his mind, but the roads around his estate were inexplicably shut down due to a citywide police investigation. Traffic everywhere was at a standstill. Irritated phone calls to his dispatch service yielded nothing but apologies. The only route unblocked within reasonable walking distance was a bus stop 5 blocks away. He couldn't afford to miss the morning's critical meeting with an international investor. A massive deal, potentially the largest of his career, hung in the balance. Grudgingly, Ethan slipped on an inconspicuous coat, donned a simple cap, and set off from his lavish brownstone. The notion felt absurd. Him, a billionaire, weaving through the crowds toward a city bus stop like an ordinary person. He walked quickly, muttering under his breath every time someone jostled him on the sidewalk. The dirty puddles, the grit on the pavement, and the noise of car horns assaulted his senses. He told himself it was temporary. By noon, he'd be safe behind his polished desk again, analyzing quarterly profit margins. The bus stop was already packed when he arrived. Commuters clutching briefcases, students wearing oversized backpacks, mothers corralling toddlers. A few recognized him from newspapers, but no one dared approach. Most assumed he was just another slick businessman in a hurry. He was grateful for the anonymity, but it also felt unsettling to stand among them without the usual cushion of personal space and respect. He realized, not for the first time, how different his life had been from that of the average city dweller. Soon the bus screeched to a halt. Its doors wheezed open and the crowd surged forward. Ethan found himself wedged against strangers whose heavy coats smelled of last night's takeout and morning coffee. He nearly lost his balance when the vehicle lurched away from the curb, forcing him to grab onto a worn metal pole for support. Someone's elbow dug into his ribs. Another person's shopping bag bumped his shins. He gritted his teeth, cursing inwardly that he had to stoop to this, but tried to keep his composure. After all, a Fairchild never cracked in public. Yet in the midst of his frustration, something caught his eye. A boy, perhaps 10 or 11, sat hunched in one of the plastic seats near the back, a rumpled jacket pulled around thin shoulders. His gaze was fixed on a piece of paper clutched in his small hands. Every so often his mouth trembled as though he were fighting off tears. Despite being crammed between business people and the occasional tourist, the boy emanated a loneliness that was impossible to ignore. For a reason Ethan couldn't articulate, he felt drawn to that solitary figure. At the next stop, a jolt caused half the passengers to sway dangerously. People shuffled aside, some stepping off to make room for new riders. By a stroke of luck, a seat opened up beside the boy. Ethan maneuvered past a row of irritated commuters, practically falling into the vacant spot. Almost immediately, the boy pressed himself against the window, making space as though he suspected Ethan might lash out. There was fear in his eyes, or at least something close to it. Ethan cleared his throat. "Sorry," he said, struggling to keep the annoyance from his tone. "These crowds can be brutal." The boy nodded but offered no verbal reply. He tightened his grip on the paper in his hands, a folded-up letter or perhaps a photograph. Ethan, unaccustomed to feeling curiosity about strangers, couldn't help stealing another glance. The edges of the paper were tattered, the lines of text smeared in places. He caught sight of a few words scrawled in blue ink. It looked like a child's handwriting, or maybe an adult's done in a rush. As the bus rattled on, Ethan tried to focus on the meeting that awaited him. Mentally, he rehearsed how he'd greet his investors, the bullet points he'd highlight regarding expansion into emerging markets. Yet the boy's hunched posture nagged at him. Something about the child's silence in the midst of the jostling crowd stirred an unwelcome feeling in Ethan's chest. It was an echo of memory, when Ethan himself was a child, overshadowed by a workaholic father who offered little affection. He wanted to ignore it, tell himself it was none of his concern, but he couldn't quite turn away. Eventually, the bus pulled up to Ethan's stop. He stood, adjusting his coat, only to notice the boy rising too. They filed out onto the sidewalk together, carried along by the mass of passengers. Horns blared, a chilly breeze scraped at their faces, and everyone marched off in their separate directions. But the boy lingered beside him, glancing down at the paper and then at the tall buildings overhead. He seemed lost, as though he had no idea where to go next. Ethan's watch told him he was dangerously close to being late. The investor meeting was 2 blocks up, in an office tower with tinted glass doors. He had no time to waste, yet his feet refused to move forward. Instead, he turned to the boy, swallowing the exasperation building inside him. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentler than he expected. A flicker of alarm crossed the boy's face. He clutched the paper to his chest. I need to find this place," he said haltingly, holding out the scribbled address. It was a battered envelope, with a name and street number hardly legible. "My mom wrote it down before she..." He paused, struggling for composure. "Before she left, she said my dad would be there. She told me to find him if things got bad." The final words emerged almost like a confession. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. The address was for a building he recognized, a modest apartment complex in a less glamorous part of town, the same part of town where he'd grown up, back when he was just a nobody. Memories rushed at him. The cracked sidewalks, the flickering streetlights, the sting of scraping by with next to nothing. He pressed his lips together. "You're looking for your father?" The boy nodded, tears threatening. "Mom got really sick. She said if anything happened, he'd know what to do. But she never told me much about him except that he used to live at this address." The child paused, uncertain. "I don't know if he's still there." An unexpected surge of empathy and alarm rose in Ethan. The kid was alone, searching for a father who might not even exist at that location anymore. Yet the boy had latched onto hope, carrying an envelope as though it were a magic key. The sight of that trembling determination was difficult to shrug off. As if mocking him, his phone buzzed with a reminder of the investor meeting. He was late, very late, and everything in him screamed to run. But the rest of him, the part that remembered how empty life could be without family, hesitated. Ethan inhaled slowly, forcing calm into his voice. "Look, I'm in a rush, but I can call someone for you, or I can try to get you to that address. Make sure you're safe." He realized how official he sounded. Once upon a time, he had a heart. Perhaps it was still there, buried beneath the years of chasing success. The boy's eyes were a mixture of relief and mistrust. "You'd help me?" he asked, voice barely audible over the city noises. "But you don't even know me." Ethan glanced at the glinting skyscrapers around them, fighting the urge to dash into his meeting. "Sometimes," he said, Helping someone is more important than anything else. He wasn't sure he believed it fully, but the words slipped out unbidden, echoing with a truth he rarely acknowledged. They set off down the block, the boy clutching Ethan's hand in a trembling grip. Every step felt surreal. Traffic roared and pedestrians jostled around them, but Ethan felt a strange sense of purpose he hadn't known in years. He guided the boy across intersections, ignoring the pings from his phone and the sideways glances from passers-by who seemed to recognize him. In the back of his mind, a gnawing anxiety reminded him that he was sabotaging his own business goals for a child he had met on a bus, but the alternative, abandoning a lost kid, seemed unconscionable. They arrived at the address, a shabby apartment block with chipped paint and creaky front steps. A musty smell greeted them in the foyer, and the overhead light flickered. As the boy stared at the cracked tiles, Ethan gently took the envelope and checked the name. The father's name scrawled there was Oliver Kim, apartment 3F. Ethan's heart sank. He had a vague recollection of the name from his old neighborhood. He knocked on the door. No response. He knocked again, more firmly this time, but there was only silence. The hallway felt colder than the street outside. The boy's face wilted in disappointment, tears gathering. Ethan turned the doorknob, half expecting it to be locked. Instead, it opened under his hand with a soft click. Inside, the apartment was dim and empty. Dust motes drifted through beams of weak daylight. A battered couch sat in the corner, and a small table leaned precariously on uneven legs, clearly abandoned. No sign of the father, no sign of anyone. The boy stepped forward, voice trembling. "He's gone." Ethan took a measured breath. "It looks that way." Tears spilled down the boy's cheeks, and he sank to the floor, hugging his knees. "I have nowhere else." His words dissolved into sobs. In that moment, Ethan felt a profound ache. He remembered being alone in a cramped room, overshadowed by an absent father. He knelt beside the child, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You'll stay with me," Ethan said quietly, the decision forging itself in his heart before his mind could protest. "I won't leave you like this." Even as he said it, he felt the shift in his world, a choice made, a path he couldn't abandon now. Before going to next, please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share with friends. Ethan's phone hadn't stopped buzzing since he decided to skip his investor meeting, but he kept ignoring every incoming call. In the dusty apartment, the boy sobbed into his knees, every sound echoing off the peeling wallpaper. Outside, sirens blared in the distance, and the muffled roar of the city seeped through the cracked windows. Ethan couldn't quite process how his world had tilted on its axis in a single morning. One moment he was a man accustomed to problem-solving with phone calls and big checks. The next, he was kneeling beside a child who had no place to call home. The abandoned living room smelled of mildew and stale cigarette smoke. A lone window overlooked a narrow alley crammed with rusted fire escapes. Nothing stirred in the small, grimy space except for Ethan and the trembling boy. Gently, Ethan placed a hand on the child's shoulder, trying to offer some measure of comfort. The boy glanced up, face streaked with tears. He looked exhausted and frightened, but there was also a hint of stubborn resolve that cut through his fear. "I'm sorry," Ethan whispered. It was all he could think to say. "I don't know how else to help you right now except to take you away from here." He felt inadequate, as though he'd stumbled upon a crisis he'd never trained to manage: bills, mergers, and acquisitions, those he could handle in his sleep. This, though, was something else entirely. The boy sniffled, wiping his eyes. Are you sure it's okay? I don't want to be a problem." His voice cracked at the last word. Clearly, he'd been holding on to every last shred of pride. The admission that he needed anyone's help was too big to bear alone. Ethan hesitated, wondering whether he could truly follow through on his offer. Could he simply bring a lost child into his home without any plan? He almost laughed at the absurdity of the question. He had an entire legal team, a sprawling network of resources, and more money than he could spend in a dozen lifetimes, yet none of that prepared him to be some sort of guardian. Still, he knew he couldn't leave the boy here. "Yes," he said finally. "I'm sure. Let's get you somewhere safe. Then we'll figure out what to do next." They exited the apartment, and Ethan carefully locked the door behind them, more out of habit than necessity. The landlord, or maybe even the city, would eventually repossess the unit, but at least he could leave it secure. The hallway was dim, lit by a single flickering bulb that buzzed faintly. The boy gripped Ethan's hand, practically clinging to him as though one misstep would send him tumbling into an unknown abyss. By the time they made it to the street, Ethan's phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen. The name of his top financial officer glared back at him. He answered with a curt hello, ignoring the boy's nervous stare. On the other end, a frantic voice rattled off all the chaos that had erupted when Ethan failed to show. The international investors were fuming. The stock price had taken a small dip amidst rumors of his disappearance. Ethan kept his tone clipped but polite, offering a vague excuse about an unexpected emergency. He gave instructions to proceed without him, instructing them to email all relevant materials. Then he hung up, refusing to give the situation a second thought. The boy was still shivering. Even though the day was cold, Ethan suspected it was fear more than weather. Wrapping an arm around the child, he guided him toward the bus stop. "We'll go to my place," he said quietly, hoping that once they reached the brownstone, he could call in some favors for immediate assistance. Perhaps a social worker or a friend from one of his charitable foundations might know the proper channels. But with each step, a gnawing sense of responsibility rooted itself deeper in his chest. He didn't just want to pass the boy off to some agency. He wanted to ensure the child didn't suffer more abandonment. They boarded the bus, heading back uptown, each seat taken by weary commuters or restless tourists. This time, Ethan found himself pulling the boy into the last two-person seat in the back. The boy stared quietly at the passing streets, his eyes darting from the storefronts to the crowds. After a few stops, he turned to Ethan with a whisper. "I'm Noah," he said, voice hushed as though revealing a carefully guarded secret. "My mom always said that name meant new beginnings. She said it would bring me luck someday." Ethan repeated the name, letting it linger on his tongue. "Noah, I like it." He offered a small smile. "I'm Ethan Fairchild." A flicker of recognition crossed Noah's expression, but he said nothing. Perhaps he'd seen that name on a billboard or heard it in passing. Ethan wondered if the boy found it strange to be riding a bus beside a man whose face occasionally graced the business news. He certainly found it strange himself. But if Noah was impressed or unnerved, he didn't show it. They continued in silence for the remainder of the ride. Once they stepped off near Ethan's estate, a stately row house towering over the quieter side street, Noah's eyes went wide. He craned his neck to take in the intricate stone facade, the wrought iron gate, the polished brass door handle. Ethan remembered how imposing it must look to someone who'd never stood in front of wealth like this. Even after so many years, he sometimes marveled that it was all his. Inside, the warmth was immediate. The grand foyer gleamed under vaulted ceilings. Soft lighting highlighted tasteful artwork and a long hallway that led to various rooms. Noah froze, gazing in awe at the marble floors and the sweeping staircase. He seemed hesitant to step any farther, as though he might dirty the immaculate interior with his worn sneakers. Ethan gently nudged him forward. "It's all right," he said. "Make yourself at home." Noah took a few tentative steps. The hush of the house felt heavier than the chatter on the bus. In the living room, plush armchairs and an elegant fireplace offered a comforting glow. Everything looked painstakingly arranged by professional decorators, tasteful yet distant. Ethan silently cursed himself for not having the kind of home where a child would feel welcome. Even the lines of the furniture felt too perfect, as if no one had ever intended to truly live there. "Are you hungry?" Ethan asked, remembering that children needed regular meals. He tried to recall what a boy Noah's age might eat: pizza, macaroni and cheese, hot dogs. He had no idea what he had in the kitchen. His staff usually handled all of that, and on many occasions he ordered takeout or dined in restaurants. Noah nodded shyly. Ethan escorted him into a modern kitchen, complete with sleek appliances and spotless countertops. Within minutes, he managed to reheat some leftover pasta and sliced bread to accompany it. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm and filling. Noah ate quietly, casting furtive glances at Ethan now and then. The boy's eyes were still red from crying, his cheeks pale with stress. Between bites, he folded the envelope from the abandoned apartment and tucked it into his pocket. When they finished, Noah helped carry the dishes to the sink, surprising Ethan with his eagerness. A quick rinse under the faucet, and they set the plates aside. Noah began, his voice trembling. "Thank you for everything. I don't want to be a burden." Ethan shook his head, forcing a reassuring smile. "You're not, I promise." Another wave of disorientation washed over him. He was telling the truth. Oddly enough, having Noah here felt less like a burden and more like a jolt of purpose he hadn't realized he lacked. "Let's get you settled in one of the guest rooms," he added, extending a hand. Upstairs, he guided Noah to the largest guest suite, a space that was twice the size of the entire apartment they'd visited earlier. The bed was draped in finely stitched linens and pillows. Noah perched on the edge of the mattress, running his hand over the comforter. He blinked, looking entirely out of place, a child perched in a world designed for polished adults. "Is it okay if I stay here?" he asked, clearly still disbelieving. Ethan nodded. "Yes, absolutely." He rummaged through a walk-in closet that mostly held seasonal decor and extra bedding, pulling out a pair of soft pajamas that might be a few sizes too big but better than nothing. "Here," he said, offering them to Noah. "I'll see about getting you proper clothes soon." Noah's eyes flickered with gratitude, though a trace of embarrassment lingered. "Thank you," he said quietly, taking the pajamas. I can change in the bathroom?" Ethan showed him to the adjoining bathroom, its marble surfaces reflecting bright recessed lights. Once Noah disappeared inside, Ethan retreated to the hallway, resting his forehead against the wall. He needed a plan, and he needed it quickly. This wasn't a scenario he could just wing. There were legal considerations, emotional factors, and potentially a deeper history with the father, Oliver Kim, who might or might not be found. For all he knew, the father could turn up demanding custody tomorrow. Or maybe he had abandoned Noah completely. Ethan's chest tightened. He didn't want to uproot the child again. He checked his phone, scrolling through a barrage of messages. Missed calls from major investors, texts from his personal attorney, and urgent notes from board members. Everybody demanded an explanation. Everybody wanted to know why he'd vanished without a word. Sighing, Ethan typed a brief group message about an unforeseen personal emergency. That would have to suffice until he figured out what to say. A soft patter of footsteps alerted him that Noah had emerged. Dressed in pajamas that were comically large, the boy looked even smaller than before. "They're kinda big," Noah said with a shaky little laugh. He tugged at the cuffs which dangled over his hands. "That's all right," Ethan said, realizing how rarely he heard genuine laughter in this house. "We'll get you better ones soon." He pointed to the bed. "Get some rest. We'll talk in the morning." Noah nodded, curling up on top of the blankets. His eyelids drooped, exhaustion overwhelming whatever nervous energy lingered. Ethan crossed the room and switched off the main light, leaving a gentle lamp on so the darkness wouldn't be too frightening. Then he paused in the doorway, glancing back at the boy who, not long ago, had been crying alone in a deserted apartment. The child was already half asleep. Ethan turned away, heart heavy, yet oddly calm. This responsibility, unexpected as it was, felt like a call he couldn't ignore. He walked down the hall to his own master suite, where city lights poured through tall windows. Tomorrow, he would begin calling in favors and forging a plan. But for tonight, maybe it was enough just to have offered Noah a haven. Before going to next, please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share with friends. At dawn, Ethan woke with a jolt, the previous day's upheaval fresh in his mind. Noah's plight replayed in vivid detail, the crowded bus, the abandoned apartment, the tears. Rising from bed, Ethan slipped into the hallway to check on the boy. He paused at the guest room door, listening for movement. Soft rustling confirmed Noah was awake. When Ethan knocked, the door opened to reveal Noah still in the oversized pajamas, hair disheveled, eyes unsure. For a breath, Ethan saw relief flicker across the boy's face, as if he'd feared waking up alone once more. "Morning," Ethan said gently. Noah mumbled a response, looking at the floor. Even with that small exchange, Ethan sensed the boy's guarded posture, as though clinging to caution in this unfamiliar home. They headed downstairs, where Mrs. Burgess, the housekeeper, was preparing breakfast. She'd long been used to Ethan's solitary habits, but the sight of a child in tow made her raise her brows. Without asking questions, she served scrambled eggs and bacon. Ethan poured Noah a glass of juice, then took his seat. It felt strangely personal, sharing a table with someone who depended on him for more than business deals or financial backing. Noah ate slowly, glancing around the formal dining room as though expecting an abrupt end to this calm. Outside, the city rumbled to life, but here they sat in a hushed bubble of new possibilities. Ethan tried to think of conversation starters, but the boy's wary silence reminded him that trust would take time. After breakfast, Ethan stepped into his study and closed the door. He needed advice. First, he called his attorney, Barbara Hayes. Her gasp on hearing the story was enough to confirm the complexity. "Ethan, you must contact the authorities," Barbara said. "Even if your intentions are good, you can't just keep a minor." Ethan pinched the bridge of his nose. "I'm not dumping him in a system that's already overwhelmed. I need a better solution." Barbara promised to gather information on temporary guardianship. Next, he phoned Teresa, who ran a local children's charity. She offered to connect him with social workers who could help. "In the meantime," she added, "make sure he feels secure." Ethan hung up, anxiety knotting his stomach. He refused to abandon the boy. Emerging from the study, Ethan found Noah in the foyer, studying a painting with timid curiosity. The boy stiffened when Ethan approached, as though bracing for bad news. "Everything's fine," Ethan reassured him. "We're going to figure this out together." Noah nodded, relieved but still anxious. Wanting to provide some sense of normalcy, Ethan suggested they head out to buy clothes. The jacket and trousers Noah wore were threadbare, and Ethan couldn't stand the thought of him feeling even colder. A short car ride later, they arrived at a small boutique. The manager recognized Ethan instantly, but maintained discretion at his polite request. Noah stood among the clothing racks, overwhelmed by choices. "Pick whatever you like," Ethan said softly. Slowly, the boy began selecting shirts and jeans. Noah clutched a few items, stealing glances at Ethan for approval. Each time, Ethan nodded encouragingly. It struck him how unfamiliar this dynamic felt, guiding a child through a mundane task like shopping. For so many years, his only interactions had been with executives, board members, and staff. Now his primary concern was ensuring Noah had something warm to wear. When they reached the cashier, the manager whispered a respectful greeting, ringing up the purchases. Noah held the bag close as they returned to the car, as though it contained precious treasures. On the drive back, Ethan asked if there was anything else Noah needed, a book, maybe, or a favorite snack. The boy seemed too shy to ask for anything more, so Ethan let the conversation rest. Back at the brownstone, Mrs. Burgess discreetly showed Noah how to use the laundry room, offering a warm smile. Ethan watched from the sidelines, realizing how foreign all this must be for the boy. Once Noah changed into a fresh set of clothes, he looked visibly more comfortable. The relief on his face tugged at Ethan's heart. He remembered his own childhood, overshadowed by a stern father who rarely engaged in anything beyond discipline. He resolved not to repeat that pattern. Leading Noah to the living room, Ethan encouraged him to relax on the couch. The boy sat stiffly at first, then gradually leaned back as if testing whether the piece was genuine. Ethan settled in an armchair, bracing himself for the discussion he knew they had to have. Ethan broached the subject of Oliver Kim, the father's name scribbled on the envelope Noah carried. "Do you remember anything about him?" Ethan asked quietly. Noah shook his head, fiddling with his hands. "Mom just said he lived at that address. I never met him." When Ethan asked if Noah wanted him to investigate, the boy bit his lip. "I don't know. He wasn't there when I looked. Maybe he never cared." The sorrow behind those words was palpable. Ethan exhaled slowly, promising that if Oliver Kim could be found, they would decide together what to do. Noah only nodded, shoulders tense. The conversation left a heaviness in the room, a reminder that the child's pain ran deeper than just physical displacement. It was a wound of lost hope. Late afternoon sunlight cast long shadows across the living room. Noah flipped through a magazine, clearly more comfortable now that he wore clothes of his own choosing. Outside, cabs honked and the city roared, but inside, an unexpected calm enveloped them. Ethan's phone flashed with messages from business partners, all impatient for a response about his abrupt absence the day before. Ignoring the buzz, he considered how best to protect Noah. Legal guardianship might be complicated, but leaving him unguarded was unthinkable. In a rare moment of introspection, Ethan realized he'd never truly cared about someone's well-being outside a professional context. Now he had no choice but to care, because walking away would brand him a man without a conscience. The stakes felt higher than any corporate deal. As evening fell, they shared a simple dinner of grilled chicken and vegetables. Noah ate quietly, but a fleeting smile lit his face when he complimented Mrs. Burgess's cooking. "Better than takeout," he said, the closest he'd come to a joke. Ethan responded with a small laugh, noticing how even that slight moment of levity seemed monumental. Later, the boy retired to the guest room, and Ethan retreated to his own chambers. He laid awake, staring at the ceiling, phone in hand. Each urgent notification reminded him of the empire that required constant tending. Yet the image of Noah in those ragged clothes, searching for a father who might never appear, overpowered any ambition in his mind. He scrolled through neglected emails, then finally decided they could wait. Before midnight, Ethan found himself walking the quiet corridor leading to Noah's room. He tapped on the door, hearing no response. Cracking it open, he saw the boy asleep under the blankets, that telltale envelope resting on the nightstand. Even in slumber, Noah's brow creased with worry, hinting at nightmares that might haunt him. Ethan retreated, closing the door gently. This situation was uncharted territory, but he couldn't shake an unexpected surge of protectiveness. He wasn't sure how long they would remain together or what challenges awaited them if Oliver Kim resurfaced. But in that moment, Ethan resolved to stand by Noah, to shield him from further suffering. It was a promise he had never thought he'd make, to a child he'd met on a crowded bus. Before going to next, Please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share with friends. Early the next morning, Ethan rose to the muted chime of his alarm, determined to move forward with a plan. He dressed quickly in a tailored charcoal suit, an automated reflex forged by years of corporate routine, then paused in front of the mirror, wondering if he should wear something less imposing. A second later, he shook off the thought. He had crucial phone calls to make and associates to appease. Still, the question lingered. Should he try to blend in at home, given Noah's obvious discomfort around all these displays of wealth? Unable to decide, he merely straightened his tie and headed downstairs, where the house remained silent except for the distant hum of traffic outside. He found Mrs. Burgess in the kitchen, already busy with breakfast. Steam curled from a pot of oatmeal, and the aroma of toasted bread gave the room a welcoming warmth. She glanced up and offered a sympathetic smile, as though sensing his concern. "He's still sleeping," she said softly, nodding toward the ceiling. "Looked peaceful when I checked in." Ethan poured himself a cup of coffee, fighting the urge to climb back up and see for himself. Instead, he sipped the dark brew, mind racing with the tasks ahead. After a quick bite of fruit, he thanked Mrs. Burgess and retreated to his study to face the day's chaos. His inbox overflowed with urgent missives from investors clamoring for updates. The fallout from missing the previous day's meeting still threatened to ripple through the stock market. Ethan spent a tense hour drafting assurances, dictating messages to his rattled executive team. One by one, he quelled the crisis, citing a family emergency that required his full attention. Few pressed further, though his CFO insisted on an in-person briefing. Ethan promised to schedule something soon. The constant buzz of calls eventually subsided, and he found himself pacing, phone in hand, still unsettled. Eventually, Noah appeared in the study's doorway, blinking groggily. He wore a new set of jeans and a sweatshirt that fit him far better than the rags he'd arrived in. There was a trace of anxiety in his eyes, as if unsure whether Ethan might have changed his mind overnight. "Morning," the boy ventured. His fingers twisted around the hem of his sweatshirt. Ethan set down his phone and beckoned him inside, motioning toward a leather chair near the desk. "How'd you sleep?" Ethan asked, trying to keep his voice warm. Noah shrugged, perching on the edge of the seat. "Better than I expected," he said quietly. I wanted to say thanks for everything. I know it's a lot." Ethan nodded, leaning back in his chair. "I've been making some calls," he explained. "Friends of mine who might help us figure out the best next steps." He hesitated, scanning Noah's expression. "I just want you to feel safe. If at any point you want a different arrangement, tell me." Noah looked down at his hands, silent for a moment. Then he exhaled as if surrendering a heavy burden. "I don't really have anywhere else," he murmured. "And I want to stay." A tension Ethan hadn't realized he was carrying seemed to ease at those words. "Good," he said softly. "We'll work it out together." The day stretched ahead with practical tasks. First on Ethan's list was connecting with Teresa, the director of the local children's charity, who'd offered to send a social worker familiar with emergency placements. Though it felt abrupt, Ethan recognized the need to formalize Noah's situation. He also wanted to investigate Oliver Kim's whereabouts, uncertain of whether the man had abandoned his role entirely or might suddenly reappear. With that in mind, Ethan phoned a private investigator, giving him the name from the old envelope. The investigator promised to keep the search discreet. "Privacy is paramount," Ethan insisted, anticipating how scandal-hungry tabloids could twist the story of a lost boy found by a billionaire. After lunch, the social worker arrived. Her name was Cassandra, a calm-faced woman who carried a folder of forms and a gentle demeanor. She observed Noah politely, not overwhelming him with questions right away. Then, in a private talk with Ethan, She explained the standard procedures, verifying the child's background, ensuring a stable environment, and seeking any known relatives. Each step felt like an interrogation, though her tone was kind enough. Ethan answered as best he could, admitting he didn't know everything about Noah's mother or father, yet he made it clear he wouldn't simply hand Noah over to a random foster home. Cassandra nodded, acknowledging his stance. "For the time being," she said, "it sounds like he's safe here. We just need to do this by the book." Noah, meanwhile, lingered in the foyer, listening to the faint echo of conversation. Whenever Ethan glanced his way, he noticed the boy's face tighten. Finally, once Cassandra departed, Ethan joined Noah on the staircase. "She's just making sure everything's legal," Ethan explained gently, resting a hand on the banister. "That way you won't get whisked away without either of us having a say." Noah studied him with a serious gaze. "You're not changing your mind, right?" The question stung, revealing how fragile the child's trust remained. "No," Ethan said firmly, meeting his eyes. "I'm not." A quiet moment passed, and then they decided to walk outside for fresh air. Even in the city's chaos, a brisk stroll often cleared Ethan's thoughts. This time he found himself guiding Noah along a leafy avenue where tall trees lined the sidewalk between expensive shops and neatly trimmed planters. People bustled by in tailored coats, but occasionally someone recognized Ethan and did a double take. Usually they saw him alone or flanked by security, never with a boy at his side. He pretended not to notice the curious stares, focusing instead on the conversation with Noah. They talked in fits and starts, Noah mentioning a few memories of his mother, Ethan explaining how he'd once lived in a cramped apartment before building his empire. Slowly, a sense of connection emerged. Noah seemed intrigued by the idea that Ethan hadn't always been wealthy, that he knew what it meant to struggle. "Did you ever ride the bus when you were a kid?" Noah asked softly, glancing at a city bus rumbling by. Ethan smiled ruefully. "All the time. I knew every route, every transfer. Sometimes I carried groceries home on those buses." The remark made Noah's eyes widen. He cast another look at Ethan, as though recalculating everything he thought he knew about this polished businessman. "You don't talk like that in your house," he said, the faintest grin tugging at his lips. "I guess I thought you were always, I don't know, fancy." They both laughed, albeit tentatively, sharing a moment of mutual understanding that cut through the city's noise. As they rounded the corner, Ethan caught sight of the detective he'd hired standing by a sleek car. The man approached discreetly and murmured that he had found potential leads on Oliver Kim. "He might have left the state," the detective said, voice low. "But I've got a few lines of inquiry." Ethan thanked him, tension returning at the thought. He didn't want to raise Noah's hopes or fears yet, so he remained vague when Noah inquired about the exchange. They returned home just as dusk settled, painting the sky in orange and violet. Mrs. Burgess had prepared a hearty stew. Over dinner, Ethan noticed how Noah's appetite was stronger. The boy ate without the anxious glances he had shown that first day. Conversation flowed more naturally, too, with Noah asking about Ethan's teenage years and Ethan sharing small anecdotes that made them both chuckle. The warmth of the kitchen, the aroma of rosemary and simmering vegetables, felt strangely familial. Ethan hadn't realized how empty his home was until it had someone else's presence. Later, with the day winding down, they migrated to the living room. Noah discovered a shelf of classic adventure novels, leafing through their pages in fascination. "I used to love that one," Ethan said, pointing to a battered copy of a well-known title. "I'd read it over and over until the binding wore out." Curious, Noah settled on the couch, flipping open the first chapter. The table lamp cast a cozy glow across his features. Ethan took a seat nearby in case the boy wanted to share any reflections. but no words passed between them. The hush was comforting, a stark contrast to the usual hush of Ethan's house, which had always felt more like an echo chamber than a home. Just as sleep began tugging at their eyelids, the phone rang. Ethan braced himself, suspecting another late-night corporate emergency. Instead, he heard Teresa's voice. "I might have found a lead on temporary guardianship," she said, excitement mingling with caution. "There's a process we can fast-track if the courts agree Noah is in a stable environment, but we'll need an official statement from Child Services, plus any documentation you can gather about his parents' absence." Ethan thanked her, relief warring with anxiety in his chest. This was a step toward legally protecting Noah, yet the mention of absent parents reminded him that Oliver Kim's existence still loomed over them. If the father materialized, everything might shift. Ethan glanced at the boy engrossed in his book. He quietly ended the call, determined not to spoil the moment with more uncertainty. Right now, Noah deserved a few hours of peace. When at last it was time to part ways for the night, Noah closed the novel with a sleepy smile. "Maybe I'll read more tomorrow," he said, gaze flicking toward Ethan. "Thanks for letting me stay." A gentle warmth spread through Ethan. "You're welcome here," he answered simply. Leading the way to the staircase, he waited for Noah to climb the steps, then watched the child disappear into the guest room. Once alone in the dark hallway, Ethan found himself wondering about the turns life took without warning. Less than 48 hours ago, he was just a billionaire CEO with a predictable routine and a lonely house. Now he'd become the center of a fragile orbit that depended on him for shelter, guidance, and possibly something resembling family. The corridors felt different, less like silent corridors of power and more like quiet passageways in a real home. The soft click of Noah's door closing carried a reassuring note. Ethan returned to his own room, loosening his tie, unable to push aside the swirl of questions about Oliver Kim, about the courts, and about whether Noah would truly want to stay once all the dust settled. Yet for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt the faint outline of hope, a sense that maybe amid this upheaval, something profoundly good could bloom. Before going to next, please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share with friends. Time seemed to accelerate in the days that followed. The busy hum of corporate demands still swarmed around Ethan, but he found himself carving out more space for Noah. Each morning they'd share a quiet breakfast, scrambled eggs or buttery toast, and exchange a few words. Sometimes they talked about mundane matters, like the day's weather or an article in the newspaper. Other times, Noah would tentatively pose questions that hinted at the enormity of his past. Ethan responded with patience, never pressing too hard. Under that unspoken agreement, a subtle bond began to form, bridging the gap between billionaire and boy. One chilly afternoon, while Ethan was finalizing a conference call in his study, Noah ventured out onto the townhouse's balcony. Overlooking a small garden, the spot offered a glimpse of autumn's vibrant reds and golds. The boy stayed there for nearly an hour, breathing in the crisp air. When Ethan finally emerged from his meeting, he found Noah sitting on a wrought iron bench, a thoughtful expression on his face. The boy was fiddling with the battered envelope that had once pointed him to a father who wasn't there. Ethan joined him without a word, letting the hush embrace them both. As they sat under the waning sunlight, Noah quietly confessed that sometimes he dreamed about returning to the old apartment, half hoping Oliver Kim would magically appear at the threshold. "It's stupid," the boy mumbled, cheeks burning. "He's probably never coming back." His voice trembled on the final syllable, betraying the vulnerability beneath his guarded demeanor. Ethan placed a hand on Noah's shoulder. "It's not stupid to hope," he said gently, "but if he's not the kind of father who wants to be found, we can't force him. We can only move forward, one step at a time." That evening, the detective phoned with a lead. According to some records, and Oliver Kim had moved out of state nearly a year earlier, renting a small apartment in Chicago under a different name. It matched the man's description, an on-and-off construction worker with a history of short-term gigs. The detective promised more details soon, but Ethan found the news disheartening. The father had clearly not made any effort to find his son, and every clue painted a picture of someone perpetually drifting. Ethan weighed whether to share these updates with Noah, eventually deciding to keep it to himself for now. The boy didn't need more disappointment. In the meantime, Cassandra, the social worker, returned to evaluate the household. She carefully inspected the guest room, the common areas, even the fridge. While she maintained a polite smile, Ethan sensed her underlying skepticism. Billionaires didn't typically house random children, they discovered, and bureaucracy demanded proof of sincerity. But after speaking with Noah privately, Cassandra seemed more at ease. "He's comfortable here," she remarked to Ethan. "He trusts you." She added that her next step would be to file for a short-term guardianship petition, given the father's absence and the mother's presumed death. Ethan nodded, determined to make it official. Mrs. Burgess offered her own silent support, cooking extra portions and leaving the pantry stocked with snacks she thought a boy might enjoy. She'd worked in Ethan's household for years, maintaining a strict professional distance, but now her maternal instincts shone. She even baked cookies one afternoon, smiling when Noah's face lit up at the sweet smell. "I've got a grandchild about your age," she told Noah, handing him a warm cookie. "Lives in Boston. I bet you two would get along." The mention of family caused Noah to flush, but he accepted the cookie with a quiet thank you. Amid these changes, Ethan navigated a delicate balance. On one hand, his company required his presence for a critical series of negotiations with a Japanese conglomerate. On the other, Noah's emotional well-being felt equally urgent. Twice he arrived late to the office, ignoring the stares of employees who noted his uncharacteristic schedule. During lunch breaks, he would hurry home to check on the boy or call Mrs. Burgess to see how he was doing. In the evenings, after finishing work, he'd find Noah reading in the living room or tinkering with a small puzzle. Each time, Ethan felt an inexplicable relief wash over him, as if returning to an anchor he never realized he needed. The next Saturday, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. Opening it, Ethan found a state official holding a clipboard. The man explained that he was there to conduct a formal interview regarding Noah's situation. Unease flickered in Ethan's chest. Would these officials see a cold mansion and assume it was no place for a child? But he maintained a courteous demeanor, inviting the man inside. For 2 hours they conversed in the parlor. Noah sat beside Ethan, occasionally adding soft-spoken answers. The official took notes, nodding gravely. By the time he left, Ethan felt drained, as though he just defended a high-stakes merger. Still, hope glimmered. Teresa's charity contacts assured Ethan that everything was progressing well. "It may take another few weeks," they warned, "but you're doing all the right things." In a rare moment of admission, Ethan confided in Teresa that he'd never considered fatherhood. She laughed kindly on the other end of the line. "Parenthood can sneak up on us in the strangest ways. Just remember, kids need consistency and understanding." After hanging up, Ethan replayed her words in his mind. Could he, a man who had spent his entire adult life building an empire of concrete and steel, truly learn to be a stable force for a vulnerable child? One late afternoon, when the sky glowed a pale orange, Ethan invited Noah for a walk through Central Park. The weekend crowds had begun to thin, leaving wide pathways open. Crisp leaves crunched underfoot as they strolled past lampposts draped in ivy. Children ran about, shouting to one another in playful glee, while parents lingered nearby, sipping hot drinks. Ethan noticed how Noah quietly watched these families, his expression unreadable. Eventually, he admitted that seeing other kids with their parents made him feel both envious and hopeful. It's like I can imagine what I never had, he murmured. They found a quiet bench near the lake, watching ducks paddle through the shimmering water. Carefully, Ethan broached a subject he'd been avoiding. What if we can't find your father, or if he doesn't want to come back? Noah took a moment to process, eyes drifting to a cluster of geese in the distance. I guess I've kind of known that was possible, he replied. Mom never said much about him. She just gave me that address. But maybe she was scared he wouldn't want me. The boy's voice wavered slightly. Ethan placed a hand on his shoulder, offering silent reassurance. Either way, he said, you have a home here, if you want it. The admission lingered between them, surprisingly intimate. Noah blinked, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his gaze. I do, he whispered. I just don't want to be a burden. You already have so much. The raw honesty twisted at Ethan's heart. He realized how accustomed the boy must be to feeling unwanted. A burden? He echoed, shaking his head. You've done nothing but remind me there's more to life than endless meetings. You're not a burden, Noah. You're my responsibility now, and that's something I choose willingly. The boy exhaled, relief pooling in his eyes, though he still battled that seed of doubt planted by years of instability. They sat until twilight, letting the park's hush envelop them. The tension from the official visits and uncertain father loomed in the back of Ethan's mind, but for this moment, they found an odd sense of calm. Before heading back, they stopped at a small vendor cart to buy 2 cups of hot chocolate. The sweet warmth chased away the evening chill. Noah sipped slowly, the corners of his mouth quirking into a soft smile. It wasn't wide or entirely free of care, but it was a real, unguarded sign of contentment. They walked home in comfortable silence, each step resonating with quiet promise. Whatever storms might lay ahead, Oliver Kim's possible reappearance, the official guardianship hearings, the demands of Ethan's corporate realm, right now they had each other. And that, Ethan reflected, was more valuable than any fortune he had ever amassed. As they climbed the townhouse steps, the city's restless pulse a muffled backdrop, Ethan paused to study Noah's profile under the warm glow of the porch light. Shadows flickered across the boy's features, hinting at the countless questions still lingering behind his dark eyes. Inside, they parted ways with soft goodnights, both aware their fragile new life stood on uncertain ground. Yet that night, as Ethan lay in bed, a rare sense of optimism stirred. The quiet hush in the corridors, now carrying faint echoes of shared laughter, filled the darkness with promise. He had found a purpose outside boardrooms, a reason to stand firm, no matter what tomorrow might bring. In that glow, he felt a quiet strength building, a promise he would not break. The following week dawned gray and wet with low-hanging clouds that seemed to press against the skyline. Rain fell in a steady hiss, turning sidewalks into rivers of puddles. From the bay window in his study, Ethan watched the downpour batter the street below. His mind churned with thoughts of Oliver Kim and the uncertain path to securing legal guardianship over Noah. He had come to realize that every step forward might bring fresh complications. Yet he couldn't help feeling a quiet anticipation. His life had taken on new depth, and despite the challenges, he found he no longer dreaded each day's demands. He decided that morning to work from home, partly because he wanted to keep an eye on Noah and partly because his presence in the office felt superfluous until the next round of negotiation talks. When he passed Noah's room, he saw the boy still sprawled beneath the covers, hair tousled against the pillow. The sight stirred an unexpected wave of protectiveness. He let him sleep, continuing downstairs to check in with Mrs. Burgess. She had risen early to prep a roast for dinner, the savory aroma mingling with the humidity of the rain. Sometime before noon, Noah ambled into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. He'd thrown on a faded sweatshirt and sweatpants, new purchases, but chosen for comfort, not style. "Morning," he said, voice husky with sleep. Mrs. Burgess set a steaming cup of cocoa in front of him, and he mumbled a grateful thanks before taking a cautious sip. Ethan joined him, settling across the table. They chatted about small things, the weather's dreariness, the leftover cookies from yesterday's batch, the way the city felt quieter in the rain. Even these mundane topics carried the promise of a routine, something that warmed Ethan more than he expected. By midday, the sky had darkened further, thunder rumbling in the distance. Ethan suggested they do something indoors, maybe watch a classic movie or try their hand at baking. Noah hesitated, fidgeting with the frayed edge of his sweatshirt. "Can we see the old pictures you mentioned?" he asked shyly. Earlier in the week, Ethan had told him about a shoebox of photos from his own childhood, the few remnants of his past he still kept. Ethan blinked, surprised by the request, then nodded. "Sure, if you're interested." It felt oddly vulnerable, but he wanted to show Noah that his life hadn't always been defined by wealth and polish. They moved to the living room, and Ethan retrieved a worn cardboard box from the depths of a cabinet. Noah scooted closer as Ethan lifted the lid, revealing a collection of photographs, yellowing news clippings, and random keepsakes. A bus pass, an old keychain, a faded map. Together, they shuffled through the pictures. One showed a scrawny teenage Ethan in secondhand clothes grinning beside a battered car. Another captured him at graduation, holding a diploma with awkward pride. "My dad took this one," Ethan murmured, tapping the corner of a blurry snapshot. "We didn't talk much. He worked 2 jobs, but he managed to come to that ceremony." Noah absorbed each image with care, occasionally asking questions. "Did you move around a lot? Was it hard to get enough money for college?" Each query pulled at memories Ethan had stashed away, forcing him to acknowledge that these experiences shaped him more than any corporate success ever had. He answered candidly, explaining how he'd balanced night shifts in school, how it felt to ride the bus in the early hours, head crammed with business textbooks. The boy listened intently, a faint respect glowing in his eyes. They reached the bottom of the box, and Noah hesitated before picking up a folded piece of stationery. "What's this?" he asked, careful not to pry if it was too personal. Ethan realized it was a letter from an old mentor, a woman who had helped him secure his first internship. "She was the one who taught me never to give up," he said quietly, remembering the anxious nights when he was uncertain of his future. "I guess that letter reminded me why I kept going." For several minutes, they simply sat there, letting the hush of the house surround them. The rain beat against the windows in relentless sheets. Finally, Noah set the stationery aside and looked up. "You had it tough," he said, a note of empathy in his voice. I get it a little. Moving a lot, not knowing what's next." Ethan gave a small nod. "I know you do. That's why I'm here to help." Afternoon slipped into evening, and the storm persisted. Mrs. Burgess served dinner with a sympathetic smile, sensing the introspective mood. They ate quietly, the stew filling them with warmth. Afterward, Noah said he wanted to organize the pictures from the shoebox. Intrigued, Ethan joined him at the dining table. They sorted images into rough timelines. Each photograph carried a story, some triumphant, some painful. At one point, Noah paused on a photo of Ethan at a job fair, wearing an ill-fitting suit. "You look nervous," he observed. Ethan laughed sheepishly. "I was terrified, but I acted confident. That's half of life, acting confident until you figure it out." Later that night, Ethan answered a call from the private investigator. Fresh information suggested Oliver Kim was scraping by in Chicago, drifting between construction sites. The detective had an address, though it was weeks old. "Should I keep going?" the man asked. Ethan's gaze drifted toward the living room where Noah sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping through a novel. "Yes," he said softly, "but proceed cautiously. I need to know if he's truly interested in his son or if he's just going to vanish again." The detective agreed, promising to maintain a low profile. When Ethan ended the call, tension fluttered in his chest. Should he alert Noah about the progress? The boy seemed calmer these days, but hearing that his father was within reach might reopen old anxieties. Deciding to wait for more concrete news, Ethan returned to the living room and quietly asked if Noah wanted to watch a film or read. Noah glanced up. "Do you have any old adventure movies? Like with treasure hunts or something?" The childlike question brought a smile to Ethan's face. "I believe I do," he said, rifling through his DVD collection until he found a classic. They settled on the couch, the flickering screen illuminating their faces. Halfway through the film, the storm knocked out the lights. Everything plunged into darkness except for the glow of street lamps outside. Noah gasped, startled, but Ethan calmly switched on a battery-powered lantern from a closet. "Happens sometimes," he explained, ushering the boy to the kitchen. He lit a few candles, their soft flames dancing across the marble counters. Rain still pounded the roof with relentless fury, and thunder rattled distant windows. Yet within that gentle ring of light, they found a sense of safety. Mrs. Burgess bustled in with extra blankets just in case the heat gave out. She teased Ethan about turning into a survivalist. He chuckled, rolling his eyes at her familiarity. Noah laughed too, though a bolt of lightning made him jump. Sensing his unease, Ethan suggested they spread out blankets in the living room and wait for the electricity to return. They huddled under covers, telling stories about past storms, about times the city lost power for days. Noah opened up about a memory of huddling with his mother in a dingy motel, worried they couldn't afford another night. He spoke softly, eyes misty, but a trace of gratitude marked his voice. "At least we had each other," he said. Ethan nodded, letting the silence validate the boy's sorrow. Eventually, the storm began to ease. After a few flickers, the lights buzzed back on. They finished watching the movie, then retreated to their rooms, exhausted from the emotional day. But before Noah went upstairs, he paused by the foot of the staircase. "Thanks," he murmured, eyes shining in the renewed lamp glow. "For everything, photos, the stories, letting me be here." It was more than gratitude. It was an unspoken acceptance that this house, for now, was his home. Ethan ruffled the boy's hair and ushered him along, fighting the tightness that formed in his throat. Alone in the living room, Ethan found his thoughts drifting to Oliver Kim. Would that man ever realize what he'd left behind? If the detective tracked him down, would he try to reclaim Noah or stay away? A swirl of conflicting emotions roiled in Ethan's chest: anger at the father's neglect, fear that he might disrupt Noah's newfound security, and a surprising urge to protect the boy at all costs. The house was quiet except for the lingering drip of rain on the windowsills. With a sigh, Ethan gathered the leftover candles, turned out the lantern, and climbed the stairs. In the darkness of his bedroom, he let out a slow breath. 2 weeks had passed since he found Noah, and in that short time, the child had unlocked parts of Ethan's heart he hadn't known existed. Maybe everything still hung in precarious balance, but the flame of hope grew brighter with each passing day. Tomorrow would bring more calls, more detectives' leads, and more social worker visits. Yet tonight, the hush carried a promise. They were forging a bond that might stand strong against whatever storms lay ahead. Ethan woke early with the sense that the day would bring new challenges. A swirl of half-formed fears and hopes churned in his mind as he dressed in a crisp navy suit, determined to face both corporate obligations and the ongoing quest to secure Noah's well-being. Last night's tempest had left the morning sky cleansed, the horizon streaked with pale gold. He pressed a hand to his chest, trying to quell the tightness there. Even with the legal complexities swirling, he found comfort in small routines, like quietly checking the hallway to see if Noah was still asleep, or exchanging a wry smile with Mrs. Burgess in the kitchen. Life had become less predictable, but also richer in a strange way. In the dining room, he found Noah already awake, wearing a soft sweater and peering out the window. When Ethan asked how he'd slept, the boy shrugged with a faint smile. "No nightmares this time," he offered. It was a small victory, and Ethan felt an almost paternal pride rising unbidden. They sat to breakfast, picking at fresh fruit and sipping orange juice. Occasionally their gazes met, both aware that the fragile sense of home they'd begun building could be disrupted by fresh news about Oliver Kim. The private investigator had promised a possible breakthrough soon, and a silent anxiety simmered between them. Not long after they finished eating, Ethan's phone buzzed with an unknown number. His heart thudded. Excusing himself, he picked up the call in the foyer. A crisp voice identified itself as belonging to a representative from the family court. The woman explained that a hearing for Noah's temporary guardianship had been scheduled for the following week. "We'll need you and the child present," she said briskly, listing documents they must bring: proof of the mother's death, demonstration of stable income, and any evidence that the father was unavailable. Ethan thanked her, writing notes on the back of an envelope, trying to ignore the spike in his pulse. When Ethan relayed this news to Noah, the boy visibly blanched. "A court hearing?" he repeated, sounding overwhelmed. "But what do I even say?" Ethan knelt, placing a reassuring hand on Noah's shoulder. "You just tell the truth," he said. "They'll ask about your situation, why you're here, how you feel, but I'll be right there with you." The child nodded slowly, warring emotions flickering in his eyes: anxiety, hope, relief that Ethan wouldn't abandon him. Together, they resolved to gather whatever documents they could, starting with the limited paperwork Noah's mother had left behind. They spent the morning searching for any clue about the mother's passing, rummaging through the battered envelope that had led Noah to the abandoned apartment. Inside were scraps of old receipts, a hospital bracelet, and an obituary clipped from a small community newspaper. Noah ran his fingers over the obituary, reading the words describing his mother as a dedicated caregiver, survived by one child. The mention felt painfully brief, a stark summary of a life that meant everything to him. He blinked, swallowing tears, and passed the slip of paper to Ethan, who held it gingerly, feeling the weight of the boy's grief. After a quick lunch, Ethan ushered Noah into the car, deciding to visit the law firm that had handled much of his own estate planning. There, he hoped to find guidance on how best to present their case. As they drove, Noah stared out the window, taking in the city that rushed around them. Ethan could almost see the questions forming in the boy's mind. Did he belong here? Would the court decide otherwise? The mixture of trust and apprehension in Noah's eyes tore at Ethan's resolve. He gripped the steering wheel, silently vowing not to fail the child. At the law firm, Barbara Hayes greeted them with a calm, professional air. She invited them into a spacious conference room, walls lined with leather-bound volumes. Noah perched in a high-backed chair, dwarfed by the polished table. Barbara explained the basic proceedings. A family court judge would hear testimony, evaluate living arrangements, and decide if a temporary guardianship served the child's best interest. If the father shows up, it may complicate matters, she noted gently. Ethan felt Noah tense beside him. But if he's truly absent, the court often grants the petition, especially given your resources and stable environment. Reassured but still uneasy, they left the firm. The sky had turned cloudy again, casting a pall over the city's high-rises. Ethan suggested they stop by a bookstore on the way home, hoping a small diversion might calm Noah's nerves. The boy brightened at the idea, so they pulled up in front of a cozy shop tucked between larger storefronts. Inside, the air was scented with paper and coffee. Noah immediately disappeared into the children's section, scanning titles with eager curiosity. Ethan watched from a distance, heart warming at the sight of Noah's genuine excitement. When they regrouped by the cashier, Noah carried 2 books, carefully selected. He looked shy but pleased as Ethan paid. "I've been wanting to read these for a while," Noah admitted, voice rising above the store's quiet hum. "Mom used to say reading could take me anywhere." Ethan nodded, remembering his own youth spent devouring secondhand paperbacks. "She was right," he murmured. "Books saved me in more ways than I realized." Noah's expression turned thoughtful, as though pondering how stories might save him too. By the time they reached the brownstone, a delicate drizzle had begun, pattering on the car's windshield. Mrs. Burgess welcomed them inside with cups of tea. Noah disappeared upstairs, eager to start reading, while Ethan lingered in the foyer. He dialed the private investigator, eager for an update on Oliver Kim's whereabouts. The detective answered with surprising urgency. "We found him," he said. "He's living in a run-down complex on the outskirts of Chicago. Doesn't appear stable. He's behind on rent, job hopping. But he's definitely the man you're looking for." A chill coursed through Ethan at the confirmation. The detective paused, then continued. "Question is, does he even know about Noah's predicament? No sign he's tried to contact the boy. According to neighbors, he's rarely home, always chasing casual work." Ethan's throat tightened. He pictured a drifter who might not care about the child he'd left behind. Still, if the man was alive, the law might grant him paternal rights. "Keep observing, but do nothing else for now," Ethan instructed, his tone steely. "I need to see how the hearing goes. If Kim tries to intervene, we'll handle it legally." The detective agreed, promising to maintain absolute discretion. Ethan ended the call with a mix of relief and dread. He climbed the stairs to the second floor, finding Noah seated on the edge of his bed, reading under the glow of a table lamp. The child looked up when Ethan entered. "Everything okay?" he asked softly. Ethan hesitated, weighing whether to tell him about the detective's revelation. At length, he nodded. "We're making progress," he said, "but nothing changes for now." Noah exhaled, relief mingling with lingering anxiety. Ethan patted the boy's shoulder. "We have a court date next week," he reminded him. "Let's focus on that. I'll stand by you, no matter what happens." Noah gave a half smile, then returned his gaze to the open book, bracing himself for the uncertainty ahead. That night, as thunder rumbled in the distance, Ethan stared at the city lights from his bedroom window. The knowledge that Oliver Kim had been found gnawed at him. He didn't want to keep secrets from Noah, but he also didn't want to raise false hopes. Despite the turmoil, a sense of determination fueled Ethan's thoughts. He would do all he could to protect this child, to give him the security he deserved. Slipping into bed, Ethan let his thoughts drift to the upcoming hearing. A sense of calm laced with apprehension took hold. They were on the verge of a pivotal change, and he was prepared to fight for it with everything he had. Before going to next, please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share with friends. The days leading up to the hearing felt like they were both dragging and rushing simultaneously. Every morning, Ethan would open his laptop and read through a barrage of emails from his legal team, each one confirming or requesting additional evidence about Noah's circumstances. Despite his wealth and influence, the formalities of family court did not bend easily. On top of that, the private investigators' reports about Oliver Kim kept piling in. The man had no stable job, a string of unpaid bills, and often changed addresses, never staying in one place longer than a few months. If he had any plan to reclaim Noah, he gave no sign. Yet the possibility hovered like a storm cloud, crackling with unspoken tension. Meanwhile, Noah remained uncharacteristically quiet. Though he stayed close to Ethan in the house, helping with small chores or reading in the living room, his gaze often drifted toward the windows. Whenever thunder rumbled in the late afternoon sky, Ethan would see him tense, as if expecting more upheaval. In the evenings, Ethan tried to distract him with movies, card games, or even a trip to the local arcade, but the boy's subdued responses indicated that the looming court date weighed heavily on his mind. Ethan understood that pressure all too well. He felt it too, coiling in his stomach each time he pictured the formal courtroom. 3 nights before the hearing, Cassandra, the social worker, arrived for a final home inspection. She walked through the townhouse, taking notes on cleanliness, safety, and the general living environment. She also spoke to Noah in private, asking about his comfort level and whether he felt threatened or uncertain. Afterward, she summoned Ethan to the dining room and gave her assessment. "You've made impressive strides in ensuring Noah's well-being," she acknowledged, her expression kind but professional. "However, the judge may still want to see if any paternal relatives exist who can claim custody." Ethan nodded, aware that the ghost of Oliver Kim could surface at the worst possible moment. Late that evening, after Cassandra left, Ethan found Noah sitting on the staircase, legs drawn to his chest. The boy stared at the railings, lost in thought. When Ethan approached, Noah inhaled unsteadily. "Do you think it'll go okay?" he asked, voice tight with apprehension. "What if they don't let me stay?" Gently, Ethan sat beside him, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "We've done everything we can," he said. "We have documentation, a stable home, and testimonies from people who've seen how we live. The court usually wants to protect a child's best interest. That's you, Noah." Noah sniffled, glancing away as if embarrassed by his tears. "I'm sorry," he mumbled. I've never had anyone fight for me before. I don't want to lose it." His raw honesty sent a pang through Ethan's chest. He had never realized the depth of Noah's insecurity, how easily it could devour any sliver of hope. Without hesitation, he pulled the boy into a careful hug, holding him until the trembling eased. "I'm not going anywhere," he whispered. "No matter what happens, you'll never be alone again." When the morning of the hearing finally arrived, the sun was hidden behind thick ash-colored clouds threatening another storm. Ethan dressed in a simpler suit than usual, trying to appear approachable rather than intimidating. Noah wore a modest collared shirt and freshly pressed pants, his hair neatly combed. They rode to the courthouse in Ethan's car, accompanied by Barbara Hayes, who would serve as their legal counsel. Noah stared out the window, silent except for the occasional sigh. Each bump in the road seemed to echo in Ethan's chest. Outside the family courthouse, the atmosphere was busy yet subdued. Individuals milled about, some in suits, others in everyday attire, each carrying the weight of personal struggles or complicated family dramas. Barbara led them to a small waiting area. While she checked them in, Ethan found a bench for Noah and tried to break the tension. "Remember that arcade game we tried?" he asked softly. "We'll have to go back and beat that high score." Noah managed a faint smile. "Yeah," he murmured. "I'd like that." Soon a court clerk beckoned them forward. They walked through a doorway into a small wood-paneled courtroom illuminated by rows of overhead lights. The judge sat behind a raised desk flanked by stacks of case files. She was a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor. After formalities, Barbara presented their petition for temporary guardianship, citing Ethan's stable household and Noah's need for consistent care. Ethan watched Noah's hands shake in his lap but was relieved to see the boy answer questions clearly when asked about his background and feelings. Cassandra testified as well, noting that she found no reason to suspect neglect or wrongdoing. She emphasized that Noah had expressed a desire to remain with Ethan, that the environment was suitable, and that they had no current leads on maternal relatives. However, as Ethan anticipated, the question of the father arose. "Has there been any contact or appearance by Oliver Kim?" the judge inquired, peering over her glasses. Barbara stood, explaining that while Oliver Kim was believed to be alive out of state, he had shown no interest or intent to care for Noah. The judge nodded, her face unreadable. "And if Mr. Kim appears later to claim parental rights?" Barbara paused, exchanging a glance with Ethan. "Then we would address the situation at that time, Your Honor," she said carefully. "For now, the child requires a guardian who can offer immediate stability." The judge seemed to weigh the words, flipping through a few pages of documentation. Silence thickened the air, and Ethan could feel Noah's eyes darting toward him, searching for reassurance. He reached over and squeezed the boy's hand beneath the table. At last, the judge set aside the files. "Based on the testimony and evidence, I see no reason to deny the request. I will grant Mr. Fairchild temporary guardianship of Noah, effective immediately, pending any future claims by a verified parent or legal guardian." Relief swept through Ethan so powerfully that he momentarily forgot his usual composure. Noah released a pent-up breath, tears glistening. Barbara offered them a pleased nod, taking the official papers from the clerk. They'd cleared a monumental hurdle, though Ethan knew it was only the beginning of a longer journey. Outside the courtroom, Noah paused in the corridor, shoulders trembling with silent sobs. Ethan crouched beside him, gently turning the boy's face upward. "We did it," he said, a warm surge of triumph filling his chest. Noah nodded, tears spilling over. I was so scared," he whispered, "but I believed in you." The sincerity of that statement made Ethan's throat constrict. He pulled Noah into a hug, ignoring any passing stares. For the first time, he truly recognized how much it meant for a child to trust him so completely. Barbara cleared her throat softly. "Congratulations," she said, handing Ethan the paperwork. "Just remember, this is temporary. If Oliver Kim resurfaces, we might have a battle. But for now, you have legal authority to make decisions for Noah." Ethan nodded, tucking the documents carefully into his briefcase. "Thank you, Barbara," he said. "I appreciate everything." Before she left, she instructed him on the next steps, such as registering Noah for school and updating medical records. Ethan looked down at Noah. "School, huh? Maybe we'd better get your records in order," he teased, ruffling the boy's hair. They exited the courthouse into a drizzle, far gentler than the ominous clouds suggested. On the drive home, neither spoke much. Instead, they basked in a shared sense of accomplishment. It was a small victory, but it felt momentous. Back at the brownstone, they found Mrs. Burgess waiting with a batch of freshly baked pastries. She clasped her hands in delight at the good news, passing plates around as they gathered in the kitchen. Over sweet rolls and milk, they laughed and let the tension drain away. Noah's shoulders seemed lighter, his eyes brighter than Ethan had ever seen. That night, after dinner, Ethan sat with Noah in the living room. They watched the flicker of city lights outside, letting the hum of traffic lull them into an easy calm. Eventually, Noah spoke up. "Does this mean I'm your responsibility now?" He asked it carefully, as though testing the words. "Well," Ethan said, "it means I get to be the one who signs your permission slips, makes sure you go to the dentist, and picks you up from school. And I'm honored to do it." A slow smile stretched across the boy's face, a mixture of relief and acceptance. In that quiet moment, Ethan thought of Oliver Kim again. The detective's file was tucked away in his drawer, detailing the man's erratic existence. A father in name only, drifting from city to city. If he chose to appear, would Noah still want to see him? Would he attempt to claim the boy he had never truly known? The prospect chilled Ethan, but he refused to let it dominate his thoughts tonight. They had won an important step. For now, Noah was safe, and Ethan had official recognition of their bond. Satisfied, they both headed upstairs as the clock neared midnight. The hallway lights glowed softly, illuminating the path to their separate rooms. Before Noah closed his door, he turned, face earnest. "Ethan, thanks for not giving up on me." Ethan felt an unexpected sting of tears. How many times had he held board meetings in these halls, never imagining they would echo with the voice of a child who truly needed him? "Never," he said, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I'll always be here, Noah." Before going to next, please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share with friends. In the days following the court's ruling, a surprising sense of peace settled over the brownstone. With temporary guardianship officially granted, Ethan allowed himself to exhale, confident that Noah belonged there, at least for now. Mornings started with less tension, and the flicker of anxiety in the boy's eyes seemed to fade. Though the looming figure of Oliver Kim had not disappeared entirely, the immediate threat of someone whisking Noah away felt diminished. For the first time since that fateful bus ride, Ethan felt as though he could build a real routine around caring for the child who had upended his life in all the best ways. Noah's days began to assume a gentle pattern. A quick breakfast with Ethan before the man hurried off to handle either in-person meetings or calls from his home office, followed by a few hours of reading, helping Mrs. Burgess with small tasks, or chatting online with social workers who wanted to gauge his progress. At first, the boy lingered in a space of uncertainty, unsure if he should ask for anything else, like enrolling in school or joining some activity. But Barbara, the lawyer, gently nudged Ethan to tackle that next step. "He's bright," she reminded him. "He deserves the chance to learn in a proper environment, not just by reading books at home." Reluctant to thrust Noah into a strange school without preparation, Ethan arranged a visit to a private institution known for flexible admission policies. They stepped into a high-ceilinged foyer lined with rows of lockers, passing students who gawked at the impeccably dressed billionaire in their midst. Noah, a bit self-conscious, stuck close to Ethan's side, eyes darting around at the swirl of teenage chatter and half-familiar routine. The headmistress, a poised woman named Dr. Davenport, greeted them warmly. After listening to Noah's situation with surprising empathy, she suggested he could begin attending introductory classes to see how he adjusted. The idea both excited and terrified him, but he nodded, determined not to let fear hold him back. Back at home, they hashed out the details over dinner. Noah admitted he was nervous about being so far behind academically, given the sporadic schooling he'd received in different shelters. Ethan promised to hire a tutor if needed. "We'll do whatever it takes to help you catch up," he said, scooping extra pasta onto Noah's plate. The boy's nod conveyed both gratitude and apprehension. That night, Ethan found himself poring over school enrollment forms instead of business contracts. He highlighted sections about health records, emergency contacts, and parental signatures. It all felt surreal, but it also felt right. The next day, while Noah studied a stack of suggested reading, Ethan received the call he'd been half dreading and half expecting. His private investigator's voice was tense. "I spoke with Kim. He's suspicious about why someone's asking questions. I hinted there might be legal matters involving a child." Ethan's heart kicked in his chest. "Did he react?" he pressed. The detective paused. He seemed uneasy. He asked if the mother was in trouble. I told him she'd passed. That's when he went quiet. Resting a hand on the edge of his desk, Ethan willed himself to stay calm. "So he knows about Noah then," he murmured. "How did he leave things?" The detective coughed. "He said he'd call me back. I'm not sure what he's thinking, but I'd prepare for him to show up either to make a claim or to vanish again." After the call, Ethan sank into his chair, adrenaline surging. Part of him raged at this man who had abandoned Noah for so long, leaving the boy to wander in search of answers that never came. Another part worried that Kim, if cornered, might try to exploit the situation. He could demand custody or cause turmoil in some other way. Slipping the phone into his pocket, Ethan stared at the framed picture on his desk, one of him and Noah taken a week prior by Mrs. Burgess. The boy's grin in that snapshot radiated a kind of trust Ethan had grown desperate to protect. He decided against telling Noah about the conversation, at least for now. Instead, he threw himself into preparing for the boy's tentative start at school the following Monday. They visited a stationery shop to purchase notebooks and pencils, then picked out a sturdy backpack. Noah seemed fascinated by the small, mundane rituals of school life, from labeling his notebooks to choosing a lunchbox. Yet each time they paused, Ethan glimpsed flickers of concern in the boy's eyes, as if he sensed some unspoken tension lurking beneath the surface. Ethan did his best to deflect it with encouragement and small jokes. On Sunday, the day before Noah's first official class, they took a stroll through Central Park, hoping to calm the jitters. The autumn leaves, rust-colored and crisp, had begun carpeting the pathways. Groups of families played catch or picnicked on the grass, their laughter echoing in the cool air. Noah watched these scenes with a wistful smile, occasionally kicking at the piles of fallen leaves. "Do you think they had to do court stuff too?" he asked abruptly, nodding at a father chasing his giggling daughter. Ethan blinked, then let out a light chuckle. "I doubt it, but every family has a story, you know. They just might not be as complicated as ours." Noah tried to grin, though it came out lopsided. "Ours is pretty complicated, huh?" Ethan nodded, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Maybe, but at least we're in it together." They walked on, drifting past buskers strumming guitars near the Bethesda Terrace. Noah stopped to toss a few coins into an open guitar case, smiling awkwardly when the musician nodded in thanks. As the afternoon light slanted between the park's ancient oaks, Ethan found himself hoping Oliver Kim would never return, at least not until Noah felt secure enough to face him. Early Monday arrived with bright sunlight gleaming across the townhouse windows. Noah, dressed in a simple polo and jeans, clutched his new backpack in the foyer, his brows furrowed with that mixture of excitement and fear that Ethan remembered from his own earliest ventures into a new school. Mrs. Burgess fussed, handing them a packed lunch and offering last-minute reminders. Before stepping outside, Noah took a deep breath, glancing up at Ethan. "Will you walk in with me?" he asked softly. Ethan smiled. "Of course. I wouldn't leave you on your own for this." They rode in comfortable silence, and upon arrival, Dr. Davenport greeted them, guiding Noah toward his homeroom. The hallway brimmed with students shuffling to class, the white noise of chatter filling the space. Ethan leaned down, offering a few quick words of encouragement and a thumbs up. Noah nodded, then disappeared behind a door, swallowed by the swirl of new classmates and desks. Standing there, Ethan felt a pang, equal parts pride and protectiveness. He had half a mind to wait outside all day, but reason told him that learning required space and trust. Returning to the car, Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, heart jolting when he recognized the detective's number again. This time, the man's voice was more urgent. "Kim called me back," he said. "He demanded to know the child's whereabouts. I refused to disclose details, but he insisted he had rights. Mentioned wanting to speak to a lawyer. A cold wave swept through Ethan. "Is he coming here?" he asked, gripping the wheel. "Potentially," the detective said. "He talked about needing money, so maybe he's just fishing for a payout. Hard to say." Even so, the threat was real. Ethan ended the call with a knot tightening in his stomach. Throughout the day, Ethan struggled to concentrate on any meeting or conference call. His thoughts circled around Noah, now sitting in some classroom, naive to the brewing conflict. At lunch, Ethan found himself texting Dr. Davenport to confirm the boy was doing well, nothing short of paternal nerves. She replied promptly that he seemed fine, a bit shy but diligent with his work. Relieved, Ethan tried to push aside the specter of Oliver Kim. By mid-afternoon, though, a new text from the detective arrived. "Kim just bought a one-way ticket. Chicago to NYC, arrives tomorrow." The words made Ethan's blood run cold. This was no longer a hypothetical scenario. Oliver Kim intended to show up, likely to claim his son or extort something in return. Fury and fear wrestled in Ethan's chest. He pictured Noah's hopeful face, the boy finally settling into the idea of a stable life, and he felt an almost primal need to protect him. When the school day ended, Ethan rushed to pick up Noah. He found the boy waiting near the entrance, looking both exhausted and exhilarated. "I made a friend," Noah said shyly, climbing into the passenger seat. "We talked about books, and I might try joining a writing club." His eyes sparkled with a new sense of belonging. Ethan forced a smile, praising his bravery, yet beneath the surface he was already planning how to confront Oliver Kim without shattering Noah's fragile peace. Each mile back to the brownstone felt heavier, his foot pressing the accelerator a bit harder than normal. Once home, he pulled Noah aside, determined to prepare the boy without entirely scaring him. "There's a chance your father might come to the city soon," he said carefully, watching Noah's expression freeze. "We don't know what he wants, but if he tries to contact you, I want you to let me know immediately. You're safe here, but I want you to be aware." Noah's face paled, and he gripped the straps of his backpack. "He never came before," he whispered. "Why now?" Ethan drew in a shaky breath. "I'm not sure. Maybe because he finally realized you exist. Maybe he wants to see if he can make a quick profit. I don't know, but I promise you, I won't let him hurt you." Despite his reassurances, he saw the old fear flicker back into Noah's eyes. Over dinner, the boy barely spoke, picking at his food with a solemn air. Mrs. Burgess cast worried glances at them both, sensing the house's shift in mood. Later that night, Ethan lingered outside Noah's bedroom door, hearing the soft rustle of the child moving restlessly under the covers. He knocked gently and stepped inside, finding Noah wide awake. Quietly, Ethan guided him to breathe, focusing on calm thoughts, the way one might soothe a younger child after a nightmare. Gradually, Noah's tense muscles eased. Still, even as Ethan left the room, dread loomed. Oliver Kim was due in less than 24 hours, a wild card threatening to destroy the fragile sanctuary they had created. Yet something like resolve hardened in Ethan's chest. Noah had called him family, maybe not in words but in trust, and Ethan would do anything to honor that trust, no matter what confrontation lay ahead. In the hush of early morning, Ethan rose before dawn, the city still cloaked in a blanket of darkness. He dressed in casual clothes, expecting a turbulent day. Through the hallway's dim glow, he saw a faint strip of light beneath Noah's bedroom door. The boy was awake too, anxiety gnawing at him as Oliver Kim's arrival drew near. Downstairs, Mrs. Burgess brewed coffee, leaving the pot on low simmer. She offered Ethan a worried glance but said nothing. Her eyes alone conveyed concern. Sipping his mug, Ethan wondered if he should confront Oliver away from the brownstone. The detective's updates implied Kim's plane would land around midday, giving Ethan hours to plan. While the sun rose, Ethan tapped on Noah's door. The boy sat on his bed, hugging a pillow. Dark circles framed his eyes, evidence of another restless night. "You didn't sleep either?" Noah asked. Ethan shook his head. "We'll face this together, but no matter what he says or does, this house is your home. He can't force you to go." The boy nodded, lips trembling. At 8, Ethan decided to work from home, though he doubted he could focus on corporate affairs. He stationed himself in his study, phone by his side, emails half forgotten. Noah tried to read on the couch outside, but Ethan often glimpsed him pacing the hall, hands stuffed in his pockets. Each passing minute ratcheted up the tension as though a thunderstorm loomed just out of sight. When noon approached, the detective called. "He's landed," the man reported tersely. "I see him leaving baggage claim. He doesn't travel light. 3 duffel bags, probably all his possessions." Ethan's stomach clenched. "Is he heading here directly?" "Looks like he's grabbing a cab," the detective replied. "I'll follow and let you know." The call ended, leaving Ethan trembling with adrenaline. Half an hour later, the detective texted a single word: "En route." That was all it took to send the atmosphere in the townhouse into a standstill. Noah hovered on the stairs, silent, while Mrs. Burgess busied herself rearranging items in the kitchen just to keep her nerves in check. Ethan paced by the front windows, peering down the block for any sign of a cab. Eventually, a battered sedan pulled up at the curb, and a gaunt figure emerged. Oliver Kim stood on the sidewalk, squinting at the brownstone's facade. His clothes hung loosely, shoulders hunched, hair unkempt. He hoisted a ragged bag onto one shoulder and trudged forward, scowling at the stately entrance. Ethan watched him approach, heart pounding with fierce protectiveness. At the door, Kim hesitated before rapping sharply on the knocker. Ethan pulled the door open just enough to face the man. The detective lingered inconspicuously a few yards away, ready to intervene if things turned ugly. Kim's gaze swept over Ethan, and his lip curled slightly. "So you're the one who's got my boy," he said, voice tinged with irritation. Ethan stiffened, controlling the urge to snap. "I'm his guardian," he corrected. "The courts granted me responsibility after you abandoned him." Kim let out a dry laugh. "Abandoned? I never even knew the kid existed until recently. His mother never told me. If I'd known, I'd have..." He paused, searching for a claim, but the hollowness in his eyes betrayed his doubt. Ethan sensed the man's bravado was part anger, part desperation. "Do you want to come in and talk?" Ethan asked quietly, stepping aside only slightly. Before Kim could answer, a small figure appeared behind Ethan. Noah stared at his father with mingled fear and curiosity. Oliver Kim's stance faltered at the sight. "Noah, right?" he said, voice rough. "You got bigger than I'd imagined." Noah pressed himself against Ethan's side, silent. The boy's trembling was unmistakable. The father's gaze flickered with something that might have been regret. Ethan led the man into the foyer, gesturing for Mrs. Burgess to stand by. They moved into the living room, its warmth a stark contrast to the tension. Kim dumped his bag on the floor, scanning the plush furnishings with a sneer. "Must be nice," he muttered. Ethan swallowed his irritation. "We can discuss details calmly, or we can have this conversation elsewhere. Your choice." Kim eyed Noah, who lingered near the couch. "Kid, your old man's here," he said, voice softening slightly. "Don't you want to come with me?" Fear flickered in Noah's eyes. He shook his head, stepping closer to Ethan. The rejection lit a spark of anger behind Kim's gaze. "Look," Ethan interjected firmly. "Noah's been through enough. If you're here to claim fatherhood, you'll need to prove to the court you're fit. If you're here for money, say it outright." Rage flashed across Kim's face. "You think you know me. I'm his dad, and you're nobody." He took a step forward, fists clenched. Instinctively, Ethan shifted to shield Noah. A moment of charged silence stretched, broken only by the detective stepping in from the doorway, clearing his throat. "Is everything all right?" he asked politely, eyes locked on Kim. Kim backed off, swallowing. "Look, I'm not looking for a fight," he muttered. "I just want what I'm owed." There it was, the crux of his motivation. "You want money?" Ethan's voice cut like steel. Kim rolled his shoulders, shooting Noah a quick glance. "If the kid's living in luxury, how about some help for the man who gave him life? That's fair, isn't it?" Noah flinched at the callous tone. Ethan clenched his jaw, raw anger simmering. "No. What's fair is giving Noah the stability he needs. You've never supported him. You left him to fend for himself. If you truly wanted to be a father, you'd focus on building a relationship, not demanding cash." Kim spat on the polished floor, glaring. "I don't need a lecture from some suit." He advanced again, but the detective gently placed a hand on his arm. "That's enough," the man warned. Kim glared at him, then turned on Noah, voice cracking. "You're my son. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" The child trembled, eyes brimming with tears. "It used to," Noah whispered, "but you never came. Ethan did." A sob caught in Kim's throat. For a second, genuine pain flickered in his features, then bitterness resurfaced. "Fine, keep your fancy life, I'll be gone." He scooped up his bag, yanking the strap over his shoulder. Before leaving, he pointed at Ethan. "You're not the hero you think you are. When the court sees I'm flesh and blood, they'll realize you're just a stand-in." Without waiting for a reply, Oliver Kim stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Silence hung in the foyer. Noah stood rigid, tears sliding down his cheeks. Mrs. Burgess glanced at Ethan, her expression full of concern. The detective nodded respectfully and slipped outside, presumably to keep an eye on Kim's next moves. The boy's shoulders shook. "He never cared," he rasped, burying his face in his hands. "All he wanted was money." Ethan's chest clenched with pity and anger. He knelt, drawing Noah into a hug. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "You deserve better." After a moment, Noah pressed his face against Ethan's shoulder, letting out quiet sobs. The heartbreak in that moment reminded Ethan how fragile trust could be, how easily shattered by selfish acts. Mrs. Burgess gently patted Noah's back, offering tissues. They guided him to the couch, letting him cry until the tears subsided to sniffles. Eventually, the boy wiped his eyes, voice trembling. "Does this mean he'll try again?" Ethan sighed, brushing a lock of hair from Noah's forehead. "He might, but we'll face it. Legally, I have guardianship until the court decides otherwise, and they won't rip you away without hearing your side." Eyes red-rimmed, Noah gazed up at Ethan. "Thank you for not letting him take me. You didn't even hesitate." Ethan smiled gently. "Never. You're part of this home now, and I'll fight to keep it that way." Slowly, color returned to the boy's face, as if the promise formed a shield around him. Later that evening, after the detective confirmed Kim had returned to a seedy motel, Ethan arranged for additional legal support. Barbara Hayes assured him that Kim's lack of paternal involvement and his evident financial motives would weaken any custody attempt. "We'll keep you updated," she said, "but I doubt he can sway the court." Alone in the living room, Ethan found Noah staring at the city lights again. The boy's eyes held sadness, but also resilience. Quietly, Ethan settled beside him, neither speaking at first. Then Noah exhaled. "I guess families can be complicated, but at least I know now. He wasn't the dad I hoped for." Ethan draped an arm around the boy's shoulders, pulling him close. "Sometimes family isn't about who's related by blood," he said softly. "It's about who shows up, who stays, who loves you enough to stand by you?" Noah nodded, lips quivering. Then he rested his head against Ethan, tears gone, replaced by fragile relief. They sat there, letting the hum of traffic wash through the windows. In that quiet hush, something felt settled. Oliver Kim might stir trouble on the periphery, but he could no longer destroy the trust Ethan and Noah had forged. The boy's small hand curled into Ethan's, acceptance flowing between them. Tomorrow would bring new responsibilities, school, more court documents, the chance that Kim would reappear. But for tonight, father and son, if not by blood, then by bond, had found a home in each other. You've liked this story. Please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share with friends.